Foreign interventions have sometimes exacerbated internal conflicts and weakened local institutions in Haiti. This external influence can create additional layers of complexity in addressing gang violence. I speak to researcher and author Jake Johnston. I met Johnston at our offices in Washington, D.C. He's a research associate at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. He recently published the book, Aid State: Elite Panic, Disaster Capitalism, and the Battle to Control Haiti. Jake, I think it's interesting, the title, because we've heard so often failed state, and you say aid state, and it's an important distinction. Talk to us about coming up with the title and the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you talk about failed state, and there are implications from the term, right? There are connotations. It means something, and often how it's used is basically a justification or a rationale for saying Haiti can't govern itself. I mean, Haiti can't do this on its own. And after going to Haiti and studying this and, spending time in Washington and looking at how policy makes it, Haiti's present situation wasn't created just by Haitians. And so this idea that failed state was leading to that takeaway, that it was all Haiti's fault, just felt totally lacking. And, there are plenty of Haitian scholars who've written about how the term is flawed in many other ways, right? That it doesn't capture the state of Haiti more broadly than the authorities, the public state, right? But I think even in that narrow sort of concept, it's flawed because it's not Haitians that are solely responsible. And it's certainly not the Haitian people, right? It's this small little elite working with foreign powers that for 200 plus years have contributed to this crisis.
I remember a Nigerian scholar saying, when you say third world country, then there's something wrong with me. It's not, the fact that, I was colonized or that these people messed up my country or they contributed at all. So the word itself means a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the point of aid state is to provide that context with the term, right? To say that there's something more going on here. And it's not just about Haiti. It's also about the world and how we've treated Haiti and how we've tried to help Haiti.
Johnston has a bachelor's degree in economics from Boston University and a master's from Johns Hopkins University. At the Center for Economic and Policy Research, he's the lead author for the organization's Haiti Relief and Reconstruction Watch blog. Your book starts with the 2010 earthquake, devastating as it was to Haiti. And I think it's so interesting because early on in your book, it's the reaction, the United States reaction versus the leader of the country who's, everything's decimated. Can you talk a little bit about why you use that as kind of the launching pad to kind of tell this story?
Yeah, I think, a few reasons. I mean, one is for a general audience, people who aren't super familiar with Haiti or haven't been following things really closely. The earthquake was a huge international event that sort of everyone was aware of. And so I think for a lot of people, it is sort of the thing they know about Haiti was remembering that earthquake. They may have donated to relief efforts or something like this. And so it's a way to bring somebody into that story. And for me, and how I sort of structured that, right, it was, the book really focuses on sort of these three main powers, right? There's the international community, largely the U.S., there's the Haitian state, and then the Haitian people. And so the opening is really the response in the immediate aftermath of that earthquake from these three different perspectives and how they compare and contrast in terms of what they're doing in that immediate response to the earthquake.
And the failed state concept, I mean, you even see that with the journalists on the ground. I mean, I think one of the initial interviews, the interviewer is like, are you afraid there's going to be looting?
Yeah, and you can see it in terms of the response, right? I mean, there was a militarized response, and that was largely driven by a fear, right? That in the absence of some state authority, in the absence of this, order, that there would be chaos and anarchy, and people would be, looting and killing, and there would be violence that would take over. And the reality is, it was basically the opposite that happens. In the aftermath of a disaster, when these communities are affected, people come together, right? The first responders after the earthquake were Haitians helping each other, right? And we don't see that, right? What we see on the news were foreign teams coming in, maybe a naval ship off the coast, a helicopter dropping aid, something like this. But that's not the story of how people were actually helping each other. And so, yeah, you see those questions to the President Preval at the time, right? It was, are you worried about violence? Are you worried about looting? It's like, no, I'm worried about the 1,000 people standing outside the general hospital that can't get help, right? These are the things that are my immediate concern. And I think, unfortunately, it's a bit of a self-perpetuating cycle, because it's that fear that drives the response. But then, because the response is driven by fear, it's not going to be very effective. And then the lack of an effective response is what's going to generate anger, is what's going to generate a pushback, right? Because now, and this is what we saw over many years, right, as the aid efforts and reconstruction efforts faltered, that's what really generated the instability. It wasn't the natural disaster, it wasn't the earthquake, it was the failure to respond to it.
And that failure on page 155, I'm just going to read a short little chunk from your book. Donors reported spending more than $6 billion in the first 3 years after the quake. USAID, $485 million in contracts and grants. Of that, 1% had gone to organizations or companies in Haiti. On the other hand, 67%, 60 cents out of every dollar of aid had gone to companies located within a 30-mile radius of where you were sitting there in Washington. Looking at the papers in your office, it's messed up. But in person, how did that dovetail? Were they very similar or different?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you hear these big numbers, right? And that's certainly what we were hearing, right? Just, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars pledged. And it's sort of hard to conceptualize how that money can be spent with so little to show for it, right? It's one thing to read a report, but you show up, where did the money go, right? I mean, there is not a manifestation of that money, right? You couldn't see where it went. And so, it led to more questions, right? Okay, it's not the case that all the money is just getting stolen, right? But what are the mechanisms that sort of suck this money off before it gets to the ground, right? How does it actually move from a donor, from a capital country like Washington, D.C., to the ground in Port-au-Prince? What's that trail? And what are all of the branches along the way where money comes out? And then, I think the other thing that I really came to realize, and this is how I started doing this work, was tracking the money, right? But it was also not just where the money was going, but why it was going, right? So then if it was all these foreign companies getting this money, why? Why had we designed a foreign aid system that was giving money to U.S. contractors and not to Haitian organizations? The people who are responsible for providing services to Haitians are not accountable to Haitians. And so that's going to have much bigger effect than just wasted money or ineffective aid. It undermines and erodes the very nature of a sovereign democracy.
There is significant social and economic inequality in Haiti. Marginalized communities, particularly in urban slums, often lack access to basic service, education, and economic opportunities. Gangs can provide a sense of community, protection, and financial support to these disenfranchised populations. Jake, I know when you work on something like this, you meet people, there are interviews, there are moments that stay with you forever. What are some of those on this project?
Yeah, there's a lot, right? It's a decade. And I think, for me, actually, a lot of the moments that really stuck with me are moments that didn't make it into the book, right? That were maybe more personal. And I think of a trip I took to southern Haiti after Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And just the people I talked to along the road. We drove from the capital out there, and just the conversations you had with people in the aftermath of that disaster, in the absence of the state, and talking to them about what they wanted to see next, right? And I think that, in a lot of ways, was really what got me thinking about this book project in the first place, was those conversations on that trip itself.
And then you think about kids born maybe right around the time of the earthquake or shortly before the earthquake, growing up and what they've seen and what they've endured. What does that do to somebody?
Yeah, I think it's something we really overlook and have overlooked in this is the role that trauma plays in all of this, and the generational trauma that was caused by the magnitude of this disaster, and not just the disaster itself. Right? I mean, what I say is there's the disaster is natural, but everything that follows is man-made, right? And so that process traumatized the generation. I think when we look at the situation now in Haiti, right, with the insecurity, with the violence, we're also seeing the legacy of that trauma from the earthquake 15 years ago.
And those kids will take up guns, they'll join gangs because there's really not much hope, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there hasn't been, right? I mean, this is, at the root of so much of this is a state, right? The aid state that really is not representative of the population, is not accountable to the population. And there is a broken social contract, right? And in that absence, we can't be too surprised by what happens, because there aren't opportunities, there aren't things. And so if the choice is, pick up a gun and eat, or don't eat, I think we can understand that choice and that decision.
Widespread human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, kidnappings, and violence against civilians, have increased in the last years. These abuses further erode public trust in authorities and perpetuate cycles of retribution and violence. You talked about the parallels and the dynamics between what's happened in Haiti and Afghanistan. Can you talk about that linkage?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, for me, the reason for drawing the parallel, right, I think for most Americans and others, right, we saw what happened in the Middle East, we saw what happened in Afghanistan, and could identify it as a failure of nation building, right? That this attempt to impose a state from outside did not work. And we were all aware of those efforts, right? There were boots on the ground, it was in the media every day. And yet in Haiti, I wasn't seeing the same recognition that its failure was its own failure. It had nothing to do with this attempt. And in fact, though, over this same time period, there were foreign troops in Haiti. There was this foreign-led nation building happening in Haiti. They were trying to impose a state in Haiti in that same manner. And just as we recognized it wasn't going to work in Afghanistan, it wasn't going to work in Haiti, because you can't impose a democracy. You can't create it from external sources, right? It has to have domestic legitimacy. It has to be homegrown for it to be sustainable. And so, these same things are happening. We didn't see it, right? Nobody was recognizing that same dynamic happening. I think part of that was in 2004, after the coup d'etat in Haiti, there was a large UN deployment, right? 10,000 troops on the ground that were there for the next, 15 years or so. But it wasn't U.S. troops, right? And this was a big sort of coup for the State Department and for the U.S. was to not have it be them on the ground, but to find other countries. Brazil stepped up, took the lead of that mission. And so it created some distance. And so for a U.S. audience, right, it wasn't the images of U.S. troops on the ground in Haiti that would have maybe in better ways provided some transparency or accountability or demands for such from the population here. Instead, it was, this wasn't our business, right? This wasn't something we were involved in, even if we were very clearly calling the shots behind the scenes.
Limited access to quality education and vocational training means that many young Haitians have few prospects for upward mobility. Gangs often fill this void by offering an alternative path that leads to more violence. In one passage, you quote a Haitian government official, I believe, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but he says, it's great to have the Clintons involved because they've got big names, the kind of marquee names. But they bring in staffers who clearly have no idea what Haiti's about or the Haitian sensibilities. And so he says, with that ignorance comes arrogance. And of course, the Haitians themselves pay for it. So I'm sure all of that's true. How do we create a system where all of that goes away? Because you kind of need those marquee names to bring in the money. But then when you bring that, then they determine who's going to come and help. Those people have no clue what's going on. And then it's...
Yeah, I mean, I think, none of this is in practice as simple as it is in theory, because in theory, it is pretty simple. Don't act like you know better, right? And I think this stems from this fundamental misunderstanding that Haiti lacks capacity or expertise or the knowledge to know what is in their best interest. That's the fundamental flaw here. That's not true, right? Of course, Haitians know what is in their interest, what they want to see, what the help is that they think they need and would actually provide them. We need to stop and ask and listen, most importantly. And without that, we're going to keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
And you see the spiral. And now, what does Haiti look like to you today? And how do we turn that around?
Yeah, I mean, this is, an immensely difficult time in Haiti. The last few months, few years have been terrible on the ground. I mean, the situation is, it's sort of hard to overstate the severity of the crisis and how much it's affecting the population there. I think for me, right, I reject the term of failed state, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't think the state that exists is not failing, right? I think the issue is that the state that exists does not actually represent the Haitian people. And so, I think to a certain extent, what we're seeing now is the collapse of the aid state, right? It is a system that was in place that was inherently unsustainable, that was always going to blow up. And the only thing preventing it from doing that has been generally external intervention and external force. And so I don't think we should see that as inherently a bad thing because, again, that system wasn't working. And so this isn't just about going back to where things were a few years ago or putting the train back on the tracks. If you listen to what Haitians are asking for today, it's a total change, a rupture, right? It's to build something new. And I think that's where the hope comes from today as well, is Haitians are organizing to try and build that. And if, as an international community, as foreign governments, wish to support those efforts, there are clear ways to do so. But again, it's going to take changing our actions, our behavior, our systems in order to do that, in order to let Haitians actually chart their own future and build that new state that is actually representative of their interests.
Jake, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.